Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. The Keystone XL pipeline vote failed tonight. A few hours ago, with a count of 59 to 41, the Senate failed to overcome a filibuster on a bill to direct the president to greenlight the pipeline. They needed 60 votes to overcome it, with 14 Democrats voting for the bill to move forward, along with the entire Republican caucus. And no single senator has been more instrumental in getting those Democratic votes than incumbent Senator Mary Landrieu of Louisiana, who's made the pipeline a personal crusade leading up to her December runoff election. Tonight, after falling one vote short, she says she would continue her fight to get the pipeline built.
It's been on my agenda, and it's staying on my agenda. And I'm going to do everything I can to help America become energy independent. For jobs, for economic opportunity, for independence, for energy independence, this fight was worth having.
Over the past 6 years, the project that's designed to carry up to 830,000 barrels of carbon-intensive crude oil per day from the oil sands in Alberta, Canada, down to the Gulf Coast has become the single most famous piece of oil infrastructure in the country, possibly the world. That's thanks to a years-long campaign on the part of fossil fuel companies, conservatives, Republicans, and some Democrats. You'll hear a common refrain from the supporters: lower oil prices and jobs from the Keystone XL supporters.
I will build that pipeline if I have to myself.
Day one, stop the war on coal, approve the Keystone Pipeline.
This is a vote to lower energy costs and create more American jobs.
It's going to help keep energy prices low.
Thousands of jobs could be created right here.
Employ literally thousands of people.
And creating thousands of temporary and millions of permanent jobs.
Thousands of jobs for people all across this country.
It's a win-win for the American people.
A project that would create lower gas prices and create jobs would seem to be a political no-brainer. But the State Department's review of the project found it would create over 42,000 jobs throughout the United States, defining each of those jobs as one position that is filled for 1 year. Those are, in fact, temporary jobs. And that amount of job creation is about a fifth of the total jobs created in the U.S. just last month alone. And once the pipeline enters service, quote, it would need only 35 permanent employees. As for lowering oil prices, there is no direct link between oil production in North America and gas prices. In fact, building the pipeline could raise gas prices. A 2011 study out of Cornell found, quote, consumers in the Midwest could be paying 10 to 20 cents more per gallon for gasoline and diesel fuel. The president himself made the case pretty well last week.
I have to constantly push back against this idea that somehow the Keystone Pipeline is either this massive jobs bill for the United States or is somehow lowering gas prices. Understand what this project is. It is providing the ability of Canada to pump their oil, send it through our land down to the Gulf, where it will be sold everywhere else.
The biggest beneficiaries of the pipeline would in fact be fossil fuel companies, increasingly spooked by plummeting oil prices, and yet the issue has become a very important symbol for both its advocates and opponents. Republicans are framing the president's opposition to the project as a betrayal of the American people who support the construction of the Keystone XL pipeline, although in declining numbers. 59% of people support the building of the pipeline, while just 31% oppose it. Today, House Speaker John Boehner attempted to warn the president off a possible veto.
Let's be clear about this. A Keystone Pipeline veto would send the signal that this president has no interest in listening to the American people. Vetoing an overwhelmingly popular bill would be a clear indication that he doesn't care about the American people's priorities. It would be equivalent of calling the American people stupid.
Opponents of the pipeline argue that it is sheer madness to facilitate the development of new sources of more carbon-intensive oil, like those in the tar sands, when we already know we can only burn about a fifth of all the known reserves from existing sources and hope to keep the planet from heating more than 2 degrees.
The Keystone XL pipeline would move us exactly in the wrong direction.
I call this the XL, the extra lethal pipeline.
Every dollar that we spend today on developing and using more fossil fuels is another dollar spent in digging the graves of our grandchildren. I don't want to dig that grave anymore.
Tonight, supporters of the pipeline couldn't get the votes they needed, but things will be very different come January of next year. Joining me now is Senator Barbara Boxer, Democrat from California. She's chair of the Environment and Public Works Committee, and she voted against the pipeline today. Senator, when you woke up this morning, did you know what the vote count was?
I knew that it was about 59 votes that they had, and they needed an additional vote. And I was the manager, as you know, of the no side. But it was such a difficult situation because we all know that Mary Landrieu is my friend and my colleague. We just disagree on this, which I think, and I've said it on the floor. The Democratic Party, we don't march lockstep like the Republicans do. We have people firmly against these tar sands coming out of the ground, and we have people firmly for them coming out of the ground. And it's just tough when you go up against a colleague, but that's the way it goes, you know?
Could you explain this to me as an outside observer watching this go down? Mary Landrieu is facing a runoff. It's going to be a difficult race. This is an issue that she has championed.
Yes.
It was the Democrats who controlled this body still, the Senate, and brought this to a vote. What is the point of going through this exercise if she still falls short of the vote threshold? It seems like a strange bit of kabuki theater.
Oh, I don't agree with you at all. I think it was a great debate. I think it's a debate that has to be held because Mitch McConnell already announced this is going to be the first thing he takes up. We had the time to lay out our case for this, against this. I was very proud of the debate. I was proud that we stopped this thing because it's not in the best interest of the American people. I think it was an important debate for the Obama administration to see how we laid out what happens with this tar sands oil, the filthiest oil on the planet, how it affects the health of our people when you refine it, how it's the hardest kind of oil to clean up when it spills. It's really dangerous. So I think the debate was important. I think it was not known whether she would get the 60 or not. And frankly, I was willing to have this vote before. We wanted to have a vote in addition to this on Jeanne Shaheen's bill on energy efficiency, and the Republicans said no. And so we took it up now. And I don't think it was kabuki theater in any way, shape, or form, because honest to God, you asked me, did I know whether she had 60? I did not.
Senator Barbara Boxer, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Okay.
Joining me now, Senator Bernie Sanders, independent from Vermont, a member of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee. He was a no vote as well. Senator, the writing seems to be on the wall, even though your side was triumphant today. The new Congress has a lot more Republicans. If they keep enough Democratic votes, which it seems they will, it looks like this might be passed, and Mitch McConnell's vowing to bring it up first thing.
Well, I think you're right. I think it will be brought up. I think they have the votes to pass it. And it's absolutely imperative that the president veto it. And if he does veto it, I think we have the votes to sustain that veto. Look, Chris, at the end of the day, the scientific community is very clear. We have got to transform our energy system away from fossil fuel, move to energy efficiency, move to sustainable energy. The idea of encouraging and accelerating the production of some of the dirtiest oil on the planet is totally insane. It is exactly what we should not be doing. I'm glad it was defeated today, and I will do everything that I can to urge the president to veto this when it is likely passed in the next session.
You know, you cite the scientific consensus on global warming and climate change. It's interesting to me, Mitch McConnell, a Senate minority leader, soon to be majority leader, when asked about climate change, likes to say he's not a scientist and sort of punt on it. But he had this to say about the Keystone XL pipeline today, citing scientists. Take a listen.
Those who took a serious look at the science and the potential benefits reached the conclusion long ago. They understand that the whole drama over Keystone has been as protracted as it is unnecessary. We hope to turn the page on all of that today.
So I learned from Senator McConnell today, you can in fact cite scientists even if you are in fact not one yourself.
You know, Chris, obviously, given my political views, I have strong disagreements with the Republicans on almost every issue. But I have to tell you, in all honesty, their refusal to accept what the scientific community is saying about climate change is an international embarrassment. It is extremely dangerous when you reject science. So I hope that the American people begin to stand up on this issue, demand that we move to energy efficiency and sustainable energy, and urge the president to stand tall and veto this.
Are you surprised by the political salience this issue is taking on? I mean, what we're talking about is building a pipeline. It's going to bring oil from Canada down to some refineries in the Gulf. They'll ship it out. It's not some huge job boon. And yet it has become this kind of totemic issue. I mean, you got Mitt Romney talking about it, every ad run about it.
Yes, because it is an absolutely symbolic issue, quite like healthcare is. The Affordable Care Act, Obama's legislation, is a modest piece of legislation originated in Republican think tanks. But it says that the federal government should do something on healthcare. The Republicans hate it. What this is about is to say, damn it, no matter what, we are going to be and remain dependent on fossil fuels. We don't want sustainable energy. That's what this is about.
Senator Bernie Sanders, thank you very much. Joining me now, Alana Shore. She's energy reporter for Politico. She wrote up the bill for Politico today. Alana, same question for you. You've been covering this. I marvel at the fact that the Keystone XL pipeline, which is looked in one way a relatively obscure possible infrastructure project that would extend an existing pipeline, has become this central political battle. How did that happen?
Well, put simply, Chris, environmentalists kind of adopted Keystone as this symbol because it's very easy to organize around. Right. EPA carbon rules are kind of clunky, they're wonky, it's tough to drive people into the streets over that. But Keystone, a piece of steel, something you can picture, you can visualize farmers having to deal with it. It's much more evocative and emotional for environmentalists. And they've done a lot of work to elevate it as a symbol. Obama, on the other hand, has given every indication he thinks this is a tempest in a teapot. Right. He's also focused on his EPA climate agenda and increasingly his global climate agenda.
So that's the interesting thing. The White House has been incredibly cagey about this whole thing. The White House today said they did not support the bill, but then Josh Earnest said if they actually pass, we'll deal with it then. From your reporting, do you have a sense of where the White House is on this? Because as Bernie Sanders just said, they're going to have a bill most likely in the first week or so of the next Congress.
It's a good question. This is a pretty delicate political time for the White House. The last thing they would want to do is give away the bargaining chip that Keystone might be with the Republican majority next year by signaling that they would accept it, given Landrieu's advocacy for it this week. On the other hand, you also saw Obama last week go to Beijing and ink this major climate deal. So he's also increasingly showing signals that he might reject the thing outright. The bottom line is showing too many of their cards this week just wouldn't have been good for the White House. So yes, they were cagey. And you get a sense also that it might be possibly used as a chip in future deals because Republicans want it so much. Climate activists, as you said, have elevated it. They've made it an issue. They've extended this as further than anyone, I think, thought they could. What do you make of the argument, well, if this doesn't get built here, it's just going to get built in Canada? You mentioned plummeting oil prices, I believe, and it's important to look at oil right now. It's around $75 a barrel. When the State Department did its environmental review of this pipeline, it pointed to $65 to $75 as the sort of danger zone, if you will, that blocking Keystone would start to have a significant impact on how much of the oil sands is produced. So in a way, we're dealing with, policy-wise, Chris, a whole new world on Keystone relative to, say, January or earlier this year when oil was around 100. And the key thing here, of course, is that the State Department's analysis, a lot of the analysis is that it's not a climate threat because it's going to come out of the ground anyway. What you're saying, and this is important, is that if oil falls enough, that's not a foregone conclusion because it becomes uneconomic to pay the amount of money it takes to get it out of the ground if you're not getting enough for it. It's actually less getting it out of the ground than it is transporting it by rail, which is more expensive and, frankly, more polluting than the pipeline. But that's where the squeeze is happening for the oil industry up there. Alana Shore, thank you very much. All right, another thing, other than the Keystone XL pipeline, that is loved by Republican politicians. It's also the darling of Silicon Valley, hated by competitors, regulators, and a whole lot of other folks. It's the most controversial tech startup in America, and it is in the midst of its big first scandal. We'll talk about it ahead.